What if I told you that the most dangerous truths about power are not openly discussed in classrooms or leadership seminars, but the ones whispered in secret circles and written between the lines of history's most chilling episodes? The psychology of power has a forbidden side, a set of unwritten rules that shape how influence is gained, preserved, and weaponized. It's not about motivational quotes or polite networking, but about what happens when a human mind holds sway over others. This is the world behind the curtains, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Power, at its core, is not just a position or a title. It's a psychological state, a shift in perception that alters how we see ourselves, others, and the boundaries of morality. Scientists have found that when people are placed in positions of authority, their brains literally change how they process empathy and risk. It's as though stepping into power flips an internal switch, making it easier to disregard the feelings of others while amplifying one's own sense of importance. This isn't just speculation. Decades of research in social psychology, from the Stanford prison experiment to modern neuroscience, have revealed that power rewires our mental circuitry, making us more impulsive, less restrained, and more prone to believing our own narratives. But the forbidden psychology of power is not only about what it does to leaders, it's also about what it does to followers. People have an unconscious tendency to submit to authority figures, even when doing so contradicts their moral code. The infamous Milgram experiment showed that ordinary people would administer what they believed to be deadly electric shocks to strangers simply because an authority figure told them to. The deeper truth hidden here is uncomfortable. Our own minds are wired to obey power, to rationalize its demands, and to protect it even when it harms us. This is why power structures, whether political, corporate, or personal, are so resilient. The people inside them are not merely manipulated, they are neurologically primed to comply. The forbidden aspect of this psychology is not just that leaders can become tyrants, but that we, as a collective, become complicit. We want to believe in strong figures. We project onto them our hopes and fears, and we surrender parts of our autonomy in exchange for the illusion of safety. Power thrives not only on ambition, but on our willingness to give it away. Consider the way charisma works. We think of charisma as charm or magnetism, but in psychological terms, it's a subtle form of emotional hypnosis. Charismatic leaders tap into deep archetypes in the human psyche: the hero, the savior, the rebel, and by embodying these roles, they bypass our rational filters. We don't just listen to them, we feel them. Our mirror neurons fire, our dopamine surges, and before we know it, we're attached. This attachment is the seed of influence, and in skilled hands, it can be nurtured into loyalty that overrides logic. Yet, the forbidden psychology of power goes even deeper. True power is not always loud or visible. The most effective influencers often operate in the shadows, shaping perceptions without ever stepping onto the stage. They use narrative framing, selective exposure, and subtle cues to steer attention. Instead of forcing obedience, they guide desire. This is far more potent because it feels like freedom. When someone thinks they're choosing on their own, they're less likely to resist, even when every element of the choice has been carefully engineered. History is full of examples. Empires have risen and fallen on the back of these psychological principles. Propaganda is not just posters and slogans. It's the manipulation of symbols and emotions. Advertising borrows the same tactics, turning wants into needs and preferences into identities. In both cases, the common denominator is power over perception. If you can shape how people see the world, you don't have to coerce them. They will walk willingly into your plan. One of the darkest aspects of this psychology is its self-reinforcing nature. The more power someone holds, the less feedback they receive. People become afraid to speak up, eager to please, or blind to flaws. As criticism diminishes, the powerful person's self-image inflates. They start believing they are exceptional, chosen, or untouchable. This is why scandals and abuses often shock the public, but not the insiders. The insiders have been gradually conditioned to see the unacceptable as normal. The forbidden truth is that power's greatest danger is not its acquisition, but its insulation. And yet, there's another forbidden truth, one that's even more unsettling. You and I are not immune to this. We like to think we would resist corruption, that we'd never exploit others, that we'd stand up to authority. But studies show that even a small taste of power can alter our behavior. Give someone control over a resource or a decision, and they begin to view others more as instruments than as equals. This is not because they're bad people, but because power activates ancient survival circuits that prioritize dominance and security. In other words, the potential for abuse lives inside all of us. Recognizing this is not an invitation to despair, but to awareness. When you understand the forbidden psychology of power, you start seeing the patterns, how certain words evoke compliance, how scarcity triggers urgency, how fear and hope are played like notes on a piano. You begin to see leadership not as a neutral skill, but as a psychological craft that can heal or harm depending on who wields it and why. You also begin to see your own susceptibility, not as weakness, but as part of being human. The question then becomes, can power be held without corruption? Can influence exist without manipulation? Philosophers and psychologists have wrestled with this for centuries. Some argue that the only way to avoid power's dark side is to reject it altogether. Others believe in checks and balances, transparency, and accountability. But these solutions only work if people are willing to break the spell, to see authority for what it is, and to demand integrity rather than illusion. To understand the forbidden psychology of power fully, we must also look at its paradoxical side. Power can corrupt, but it can also create extraordinary good when it is harnessed consciously. The very same psychological mechanisms that can produce tyranny can also produce courage, innovation, and progress. The difference lies in intention and self-awareness. A leader who knows his or her own susceptibility to bias and arrogance is less likely to fall into them. A society that understands its own tendency to obey authority is more likely to question it and hold it accountable. Awareness is the antidote to blind submission. One of the most effective ways to break the spell is to cultivate independent thinking. This might sound cliché, but psychologically it is radical. Independent thinking interrupts the automatic deference our brains feel toward authority. It slows down the rush of dopamine that makes charismatic leaders seem larger than life. It gives space for our prefrontal cortex, the seat of reasoning and moral judgment, to override our limbic system's emotional pull. When you pause before obeying, when you ask, why, before complying, you reclaim a fragment of your autonomy. Over time, these fragments add up to true freedom. Another crucial tool is empathy. Ironically, power tends to diminish empathy in those who hold it, but empathy in followers can also be manipulated. Learning to direct empathy wisely, toward victims rather than just toward leaders, can shift the balance. Social psychologists call this moral elevation. When we witness acts of integrity and courage, we feel inspired to emulate them. By consciously exposing ourselves to stories of ethical leadership, we prime our minds to value integrity over domination. This doesn't just make us better followers. It also prepares us to be better leaders should we ever hold power ourselves. Transparency is also a powerful countermeasure. In psychological terms, secrecy amplifies authority because it creates mystery and distance. When decisions are made behind closed doors, our imaginations fill in the gaps, often in ways that increase compliance. Transparency punctures that aura. It replaces speculation with information, which in turn reduces the unconscious reverence that fuels power's dark side. This is why true accountability always involves openness, not just rules on paper, but visible practices that invite scrutiny. But the forbidden psychology of power is not merely about systems. It is about our inner lives. Many people secretly crave power, even as they publicly criticize it. This craving often stems from unmet needs, the desire for control, recognition, or security. When we fail to examine these desires within ourselves, they can make us vulnerable to manipulation. We may project our ambitions onto leaders, investing them with the authority we wish we had. Understanding our own motivations is, therefore, a form of psychological self-defense. It's not enough to distrust others. We must also learn to question our own impulses. This leads to one of the deepest lessons of all. Power is relational. It does not exist in a vacuum. It is a dynamic between the one who holds it and the one who grants it. Even dictators rely on networks of compliance. Even corporate executives rely on cultures of agreement. When we withdraw our psychological participation, power shifts. This doesn't always mean rebellion or confrontation. Sometimes it means subtle acts of refusal, quiet questioning, or building alternative systems. In each case, it is the recognition of our own agency that begins to dissolve power's mystique. There is also a positive vision hidden inside this forbidden psychology. Imagine a form of power rooted not in domination but in stewardship, not in secrecy but in clarity, not in manipulation but in mutual growth. This is not utopian fantasy. It is a psychological possibility. Research on servant leadership and transformational leadership shows that when leaders prioritize the well-being of others and maintain self-awareness, they can hold influence without succumbing to the classic corruptions of power. Their empathy remains intact, their feedback channels stay open, and their followers remain autonomous rather than entranced. In such environments, power becomes a tool rather than a trap. Yet, achieving this requires constant vigilance. Our brains will always be wired to respond to authority. Leaders will always face the temptation to exploit. Followers will always be tempted to idealize. The forbidden truth is not that these tendencies exist. They are part of our evolutionary inheritance, but that we can choose how to engage with them. The choice is ongoing, moment by moment, in how we lead, how we follow, and how we think. So how do we apply this in everyday life? Start by observing power dynamics around you. Notice how meetings are run, how decisions are framed, how language is used to steer opinions. Ask yourself, who benefits from this narrative? What emotions are being activated in me right now? Am I thinking clearly, or am I being carried along by charisma, urgency, or fear? These small acts of metacognition break the automatic spell of influence. They put a wedge between stimulus and response, giving you room to act rather than react. Then, cultivate your own inner power responsibly. Power is not inherently evil. It is the capacity to effect change. When you use it with awareness, empathy, and integrity, you become an antidote to the very abuses you fear. You model a different way of holding influence, one that others can emulate. This creates a ripple effect. Just as corruption spreads through networks, so too can ethical power. In the end, the forbidden psychology of power is not about hidden tricks or sinister conspiracies. It is about human nature, our wiring, our vulnerabilities, and our potential. By bringing these patterns into the light, we take away their most potent weapon, our ignorance. Knowledge alone is not enough, but it is the first step. The second step is courage, the willingness to see, to question, and to act differently even when it feels uncomfortable. And now I invite you to reflect on your own experiences. When have you seen power used wisely, and when have you seen it abused? How did it affect you? And what did you learn about yourself in the process? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories might illuminate this hidden topic for someone else. Remember, power is not just out there in governments, corporations, or institutions. It's also in you. The power to think critically, to lead with integrity, and to refuse manipulation. Guard it carefully, use it wisely, and never underestimate its impact. If you found this exploration valuable, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping our minds and lives.